My father laughed the night I told him I'd graduate. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was sharp, like a blade sliding under my skin. "Emily, be realistic," he said, shaking his head. I went to bed with his words echoing in my skull, a cruel lullaby. What he didn't know was that I'd already made a promise, to myself, that I would walk across that stage, diploma in hand, no matter the cost. And when that day finally came, under the bright lights of the auditorium, I looked straight at him. But what I saw wasn't what I expected. My family looked perfect from the outside. My father, Mark, carried himself like the head of a dynasty, broad-shouldered, jaw tight, voice firm enough to end any conversation. My mother, Linda, was the quiet shadow beside him, all soft smiles and hesitant words. And then there was Jason, my older brother, the golden boy, who could do no wrong. Dad bragged about him to neighbors, colleagues, even strangers in line at the grocery store. When it came to me, his tone shifted, less pride, more polite obligation. It was the little things at first. The summer before my sophomore year, Dad surprised Jason with a brand new laptop, sleek and silver, for his future. When I asked if I could get one too, Dad said without looking up from his coffee, "You can make do with what you've got." What I've got was a clunky 7-year-old model with a battery that died faster than a melting ice cube. I learned to type my essays with the charger cord stretched across the living room like a tripwire. One Saturday morning, I was watering the plants by the front porch when I heard Dad chatting with Mr. Harris, our next-door neighbor. "Jason's got a real shot," Dad was saying proudly. Then his voice lowered, but not enough. "Emily, she'll probably drop out halfway. She's not built for the grind." The words hit me harder than I expected. I froze, clutching the watering can, waiting for the sting to pass. But it didn't. That night I sat cross-legged on my bed, the glow from my ancient laptop casting shadows across the walls. I opened my journal and wrote, "Am I really as useless as he thinks?" The pen hovered there for a moment. Then I underlined it twice. A few weeks later, I came downstairs for a glass of water and found my parents in the kitchen, voices low but sharp. "She's wasting her time, Linda," Dad said, pacing. 4 years of tuition for what? Daydreams and some liberal arts nonsense? My mother's voice was tight, controlled. "She's smart, Mark. Smarter than you give her credit for. You think pushing her down will make her stronger, but it won't." "I'm being realistic," Dad snapped. "I know what happens to people like her. I was one of them. I dropped out. I failed. She's not cut out for this world." It was the first time I heard about his past, not the cleaned-up version he told everyone, but the truth. He'd left college, tried to start a business, and lost everything. The shame must have carved itself deep into him, because now he seemed determined to carve it into me too. Then came the twist I never saw coming. "I was going to get her into a good cosmetology program," Dad said. "At least she'd have a trade, something practical, not these worthless degrees." Cosmetology. He'd planned my life without telling me, decided that my hands would hold scissors instead of books, that my future was a salon chair instead of a graduation stage. My mother's reply was a soft, furious whisper I couldn't catch. I backed up the stairs before they noticed me, my heartbeat thudding like a drumline in my ears. Alone in my room, I stared at the ceiling and thought, if your future's already been decided for you, would you dare to rewrite it? The answer came sooner than I expected. One rainy evening, while hunting for a folder in Dad's home office, I opened the wrong drawer. Inside was a slim binder labeled Education Fund. I flipped it open, curiosity burning away hesitation. Each page was a neat record of deposits, investments, and expenses. There was one section for Jason. Plenty of funds marked for tuition, living expenses, travel. Then I checked under my name. It was blank. At the bottom of Jason's section, a fresh entry read, "Transfer for NY internship." My chest tightened. The money wasn't just his. It could have been for both of us. But Dad had made sure it was only for him. The rain pattered harder against the window as I closed the binder. My reflection in the glass looked older somehow, the last bits of naivete stripped away. I wasn't just imagining the favoritism. It was real, written in black ink and numbers. And now I knew exactly what I was up against. I didn't announce my decision to fight back. There was no dramatic declaration, no slammed doors. Just quiet mornings and long nights, each hour of my day carved into sharp, unforgiving segments. By the start of junior year, I was juggling 3 jobs: tutoring high school students in math, serving tables at a diner that smelled permanently of fried onions, and working the late shift at a coffee shop near campus. My GPA hovered just under perfect. Every quiz, every paper felt like a brick in a wall I was building between myself and my father's expectations. Still, I knew grades alone wouldn't be enough. One rainy Tuesday, after my tutoring session, I lingered in the university library. On the corkboard by the entrance, a small flyer caught my eye. Research assistance needed. Artificial Intelligence Development Project. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just a class project. It was a real research program run by the computer science department. I wasn't a CS major, but I'd been teaching myself coding at night, hidden behind the flickering screen of my battered laptop. I tore off one of the contact slips and slipped it into my bag like a secret. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my mother, and definitely not my father. If I failed, I'd rather disappear quietly than give him more ammunition. Weeks blurred together. Work, study, research, repeat. My world shrank to glowing screens and textbooks, the hiss of the espresso machine at the cafe, the muffled chatter of customers. One night, I sat hunched over my laptop in a corner booth, eyes stinging from the light. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, the shop was nearly empty. My coffee was cold, and my bill sat on the table, unpaid. I fumbled for my wallet, but the cashier waved me off. "It's covered," she said, nodding toward the door. Through the glass, I caught a glimpse of a man in a dark overcoat stepping into the rain. I didn't recognize him. I figured he was just some kind stranger. A week later, the email arrived. "Congratulations, Emily Carter. You've been selected to represent your university at the National Collegiate AI Challenge." My hands trembled as I scrolled to the conditions. At the bottom, in bold, "Confidentiality required until public announcement." I was to keep this entirely to myself. For a moment, I wanted to run to my mother, to tell her everything. But the image of my father's smirk, "You'll drop out halfway," rose like a wall between us. No, I'd keep this close until I had proof so undeniable he couldn't laugh it away. The pressure began to mount. My days were so full that nights bled into mornings. My notes blurred together, my vision clouded. The week before the midterms, I walked into my economics exam running on 2 hours of sleep and an alarming amount of caffeine. Halfway through, my brain simply stopped. When the results came in, my stomach dropped. I'd failed, my first failing grade since high school. Dad saw the report before I could hide it. He smirked as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "I told you," he said. "You're burning yourself out for nothing. Just quit before you embarrass yourself further." I wanted to scream, to tell him about the project, the competition, everything. Instead, I walked upstairs, shut my bedroom door, and sat in silence until the light outside faded. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Failure isn't the end. It's a step. Keep going. No name, no context." For a moment, I thought it might be a friend, but none of my friends knew about the exam. "Who is this?" I typed. "Someone who believes in you," came the reply. I stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Later, I'd find out it was the dean himself, but in that moment, the words felt like a hand pulling me back from the edge. Have you ever had someone believe in you when you least expected it? It can be the difference between quitting and fighting on. 2 days later, an email popped up in my inbox. "Emily, can we meet? I know who you are, and I have a plan for you." It was signed with a name I knew well. Dean Richard Hale. I closed my laptop, my heart pounding. For the first time in months, I felt the stirrings of something dangerous. Hope. Dean Hale wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured someone distant and formal, the kind of man who spoke only in bullet points. Instead, he greeted me in his office with a warm handshake and a smile that seemed to strip away my nerves. "You've got something special, Emily," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "But you're hiding it. Let's fix that." From that day forward, he became my secret mentor. We met twice a week, sometimes in his office, sometimes in quiet corners of the library. He taught me how to break down complex algorithms into bite-sized explanations, how to present research with confidence, and how to anticipate the questions judges would throw at me. He never once asked about my family, and I never offered. Weeks passed and my skills sharpened. I learned to defend my ideas like they were fortresses, to speak with clarity even when my heart pounded. For the first time, I felt like my success was in my own hands. One evening, after another long session, I went back to my apartment and spread a roll of butcher paper across the floor. I drew a circle in the center and wrote, "My future," in bold letters. From there, lines branched outward. "Graduate top of my class. Work in AI development. Travel to Japan. Start a mentorship program for girls in STEM." I sat back, marker in hand, and stared at it. It was messy, uneven, and impossibly ambitious. But it was mine. In that quiet moment, I wasn't just chasing grades or revenge. I was building a life I wanted to live. By spring, our project entered the state competition. We presented our prototype, a machine learning model that could detect misinformation online, to a panel of industry experts. When the results were announced, my name appeared in the top 3. I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. Still, I didn't tell my father. Let him find out the way everyone else would, publicly, undeniably. Around this time, I started a TikTok channel under the name StudyForge. I filmed short, snappy videos about time management, coding tips, and how to survive on instant noodles during finals. My face never appeared on camera, just my hands, my voice, and the occasional shot of my messy desk. At first, it was just a creative outlet, but then one of my videos blew up, racking up 500,000 views in a week. Comments flooded in from students around the world. "This saved me before my exam," and "I wish I'd known this sooner." I kept posting, and the follower count climbed faster than I could believe. One morning, I opened my email to find a message from Orion Global Technologies, a multinational AI company. They'd seen my work, both the competition results and my online presence, and wanted to offer me a full scholarship for my final year. The only condition, I would have to deliver the keynote speech at my university's graduation ceremony. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling the weight of what it meant. This was the moment I'd been working toward, proof that I wasn't just capable. I was exceptional. But fate, as always, had its way of complicating things. A week later, I came home to find my father sitting in the living room, holding my phone. My stomach dropped. The Study Forge page was open on the screen. His face was a storm. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "It's just—" I began, but he cut me off. "You're making a fool of yourself on the internet. This is why you're wasting time instead of doing something useful." His voice rose with each word, sharp enough to slice through every ounce of pride I'd been holding onto. I didn't answer, because in that moment, all I could think was, he still had no idea how wrong he was. And soon, very soon, he would. The confrontation came on a Wednesday, halfway through the semester. I was in the engineering lab, running final tests on our AI model before the national competition, when the glass doors swung open. My father's silhouette filled the doorway. Broad shoulders, rigid stance, eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "Emily," he barked, striding past the startled students. "Get your things. You're coming home." The air seemed to thicken. "What are you talking about?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. "This," he gestured at the workbench. "This nonsense ends now. You're skipping classes, running around with these useless projects, posting videos online like some attention seeker. Enough. You're dropping this and focusing on something practical. I won't let you throw your life away." It felt like every set of eyes in the lab was on me. For years, I'd avoided looking directly into his when he was angry. But this time, I met his gaze and didn't flinch. And didn't. "I'm not living your life," I said, my voice low but steady. His brows drew together. "What did you just say?" "I'm not living your life," I repeated. "I'm not going to let your failures decide my future." Have you ever stood up to the one person who's always had power over you? It's like cutting the last thread holding you in place. You don't know if you'll fall or fly. His face darkened. "You're making a mistake." Before I could answer, another voice cut in. "Mark, that's enough." It was my mother. She'd been standing in the doorway, hands clenched, watching. I'd never seen her look so firm. She's not a little girl anymore. You don't get to dictate every choice she makes. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father turned on his heel and left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. My mother gave me a small nod before following him out. It was the first time she'd openly taken my side. The fallout came quickly. By the weekend, my father had canceled the small allowance he'd been sending me each month. It wasn't much, but it had covered part of my rent. Without it, I was barely scraping by. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, staying until my legs ached, then stumbling home to work on my project. One night, as I sat at my desk trying to calculate how many hours I could realistically work without failing my classes, an envelope slid under my apartment door. Inside was $500 in cash and a note. "Don't tell Dad. J. Jason, the golden boy, the one Dad had always put on a pedestal." I hadn't heard from him in months. I called him immediately. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. "Because I know what it's like," he said. "Dad expects me to be perfect all the time. He never says it, but I think he's harder on you because you scare him." "Scare him?" I laughed, bitter. "You're doing things he never could. He sees you taking risks, winning things he doesn't understand, and he doesn't know how to handle it." We met later that week on the pedestrian bridge over the river, the city lights reflecting off the dark water. For a while we just stood there, leaning against the railing. "I used to be jealous of you," Jason admitted. "You don't need Dad's approval to move forward. I've been chasing it my whole life." His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent years thinking Jason had it all. Support, funding, freedom. But maybe that came with its own chains. The wind off the river was cold. But standing there with him, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. A sense of not being completely alone. The next morning I was back in the lab, running through our final presentation slides, when Dean Hale walked in. He waited until the others had left, then closed the door behind him. "Emily," he said, smiling, "I have some news." I braced myself. "You've been selected as this year's valedictorian, top of the class. You'll be giving the commencement speech." For a second, I couldn't move. All the late nights, the failures, the arguments, it all condensed into that one moment. "And," he added, "I think it's time your father knew exactly what you've accomplished." I wasn't sure whether to laugh or be terrified, because the truth was I had no idea how he'd react. After the announcement from Dean Hale, my life didn't slow down. It sped up. Between preparing my commencement speech, finishing final projects, and keeping up with work, my days were packed. But inside I felt the bruises from the fight with my father, from years of his doubt, still throbbing. One afternoon, after nearly breaking down in the middle of a practice presentation, I walked into the campus counseling center. It was the first time I'd ever sought help without someone pushing me to. My counselor, a calm woman with silver hair, listened without judgment as I told her everything. How I'd nearly quit. How I still carried his words like a stone in my chest. How even winning felt tainted by the fear that it would never be enough. "Forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay," she said. "It's about not letting it own you anymore. And that includes forgiving yourself for the moments you wanted to give up." I went back every week, learning to breathe through the memories, to stop replaying old arguments in my head. Slowly, the grip they had on me loosened. I began to see my father not just as the man who'd hurt me, but as a man who was afraid I'd make the same mistakes he had. That didn't excuse what he'd done, but it made the wound less jagged. Then, 2 weeks before graduation, I stopped by the administration office to confirm the guest list for the ceremony. My eyes skimmed the names. My mother, a few friends, and then froze. Mark Carter, my father's name, right there in black ink. I didn't add him, I told the receptionist, confused. She smiled faintly. Dean Hale did. He said it was important. I walked out of the building with my heart in my throat. I hadn't decided whether I wanted him there. But now, the decision had been made for me. The day of graduation dawned clear and bright. The air buzzed with excitement as students in navy gowns gathered outside the auditorium, adjusting their caps and trading hugs. I stood near the back, clutching my speech in trembling hands. From behind the curtain on stage, I could see the crowd filling the seats, parents waving, cameras flashing. My gaze swept over them until it landed on a familiar figure in the third row. My father sitting stiffly in a suit, his eyes fixed on the stage. When my name was called, Dean Hale's voice rang through the hall. "Valedictorian, top of the class, Emily Carter." The applause was thunderous, rising like a wave. I walked across the stage, took the diploma from his hands, and turned to face the audience. For a split second, I locked eyes with my father. I began my speech, my voice clear despite the pounding in my chest. I spoke about perseverance, about the importance of believing in yourself even when others don't, about how failure isn't the opposite of success but part of it. The crowd laughed at the lighter moments, fell silent at the heavier ones. And then, halfway through, I noticed movement. My father was standing. For a heartbeat, I hoped, he might be coming closer. Instead, he turned and walked up the aisle toward the exit. My stomach sank, but I forced myself to finish, smiling as I thanked my classmates and professors. The audience rose to their feet in applause, but inside a hollow ache spread. I'd thought this moment would heal something. Instead, it felt like the wound had been reopened. After the ceremony, families poured into the courtyard, hugging, taking pictures. I stood off to the side, clutching my diploma, watching the clusters of parents beam at their children. No sign of my father. The sun was warm on my face, but it didn't touch the chill settling in my chest. I'd imagined so many ways this day could go. Him shaking my hand, telling me he was proud. But in none of them had he simply left. I was about to head back inside when my phone buzzed. A message from Mum. "Your father's on the phone with the whole family, telling them you were top of your class. He's been bragging for 15 minutes straight." I stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or cry. All this time I'd thought his absence was rejection. But maybe, just maybe, it was his awkward way of showing pride. The only way he knew how. It was 3 days after graduation when my father called. The number flashed on my phone, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something, curiosity maybe, made me swipe to answer. "Emily," he began, his voice rough, like it had been dragged over gravel. "Can we meet?" We chose the small park by the river, a neutral ground neither of us had claimed. The air was crisp, the water moving slow and steady under the late afternoon sun. He stood there in a plain jacket, hands in his pockets, looking suddenly smaller than I remembered. "I owe you an apology," he said before I could speak. "For a long time I let my own failures decide how I treated you. I thought I was protecting you, steering you toward something safe, but I was just holding you back. And I'm sorry." I watched him, searching his face for any sign this was just another lecture in disguise. But all I saw was sincerity, and maybe a little fear. Fear that I wouldn't accept it. "I can't forget everything," I said slowly. "But I can try to forgive." We sat on the worn wooden bench overlooking the river. For a while we didn't speak. The sound of the water filled the silence, along with the occasional cry of a distant gull. It wasn't awkward. Just quiet. A truce sealed not with words but with stillness. When the sun dipped lower, casting the water in streaks of gold, I turned to him. "I have my first public lecture next month. It's for a conference on women in STEM. I'd like you to be there." He blinked, surprised. "You want me to come?" "Yes," I said. "This time I want you to see it for yourself." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'll be there." The weeks that followed moved fast. I threw myself into preparing for the lecture, not just for him, but for me, and for anyone who'd ever been told they weren't enough. When the day came, I stood on stage in front of a packed auditorium, scanning the rows until I spotted him. He was in the middle, leaning forward, listening like every word mattered. From that point on, speaking became more than an opportunity. It became my mission. I traveled to campuses, sharing my story with students who were quietly fighting battles at home. I told them about the nights I'd almost quit, about the failures that taught me more than my successes, about how the voices that doubted me had once been the loudest, until I learned to speak louder. One evening after a lecture, as I was packing up my notes, Jason appeared at the side of the stage. He was grinning in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. "I'm done," he said. "Done with what?" "The family business, Dad's company, all of it. I'm going back to school. I want to study architecture. I stared at him. You've wanted that since high school. He shrugged, almost sheepish. Took me a while to realize I didn't have to live Dad's life either. Guess you showed me that. Something warm spread through me. A quiet pride. If my fight had done nothing else, it had given my brother the courage to start his own. Months later, I found myself walking across campus again. The same paths I'd taken countless times before. The buildings were the same. The air still carried the scent of coffee from the student center. But everything felt different now. I paused at the steps of the library, looking out over the quad where students hurried between classes. This wasn't just the place where I'd proven my father wrong. It was where I'd proven something to myself, that my worth was never his to define. As I turned to leave, I let the thought settle, solid and unshakable. This journey was never just to prove something to Dad. It was to prove it to me.